Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to today's conversation with Belgium's Foreign Minister on the next chapter of transatlantic relations. My name is Jan Fleck. I'm the Senior Director of the Europe Center here at the Atlantic Council, and I have the distinct pleasure of moderating this discussion with Minister Maxime Prévot, who serves as Belgium's Deputy Prime Minister and Minister for Foreign Affairs, European Affairs, and Development Cooperation.
Great.
Minister, a warm welcome to Washington. It's great to have you here at the Atlantic Council.
Thank you so much. Good afternoon, everyone.
We have the privilege of hosting you as our first official guest from Europe in 2026, and I believe one of the first European dignitaries visiting the United States in this new year. When we look back at last year, 2025 was a more turbulent, some would say tumultuous one for Belgium with a new government, for Europe and the transatlantic relationship. The year began with the inauguration of Donald Trump's second term, which sparked far-reaching shifts in U.S. foreign policy that few envisioned, I think, in their speed, scale, and intensity, and we'll talk about that a little bit. By the end of the year, we bore witness to the beginnings and hopefully resolution of a transatlantic trade war, a seesaw approach to ending Russia's continued war in Ukraine, and growing questions really about the reliability of the United States, but also about Europe's ability to survive in a new era of great power politics. And 2026 looks to offer not much respite. Just 6 days into the new year, and the Trump administration has already conducted a major operation in Venezuela, capturing Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro, with many still working out the implications for U.S. policy and around the world. And so we want to talk to you about how Europe and Belgium is reconsidering its approach in this new normal. And Belgium obviously has a unique vantage point in the transatlantic relationship, a founding member of both the European Union and NATO, home to the headquarters of both institutions, and a sort of front row witness to transatlantic security and economic relationships, but also a country that's long held and claimed for itself a special role as a bridge builder, consensus builder, and a proponent of greater cooperation and integration, be it in Europe or transatlantically. And so look forward to a rich conversation with the minister on Belgium's priorities for the transatlantic partnership and Europe's own direction in this increasingly uncertain world. The minister has been in his current position since February of last year, and a member of Belgium's federal parliament since 2024, and true to his title, he's already been all over the world. And so we're looking forward to his conversation. Before we start, I do want to get to questions from both the virtual and the in-person audience. For those in person, I'll open it up, catch my eye, wave at me. For those joining us virtually, you can submit your questions at askac.org, and we'll come to these. I described sort of the tumultuous last 12 months. I wanted to get your take on how you see Belgium and Europe adjusting and adapting to a changed world of power politics, what you think your priorities in Belgium, but also at the European level, ought to be, and what you hope for and look forward to in the partnership between the United States and Europe in 2026.
Well, first of all, thank you for attending this meeting, and thank you for your kind invitation. It's really an honor being the first of this new year, and I, of course, wish to all of you all the best for this new year 26. So, considering your question, in fact, from an American point of view, it seems that your authorities have the feeling that Europe has changed. Talking about the migration issue, for instance, a decline of civilization, according to the recently published National Security Strategy. From a European point of view, we have the feeling that US has changed. And I think that both are right. The world is changing. And so we absolutely need to adapt our priorities in order to be sure that we will avoid to lose a lot of energy on marginal issues and keep focused on the main strategic issues. Talking about the recently published National Security Strategy that legitimately puts the American interest in the center of the foreign policy. That's fair, that's correct. But I'm also convinced that American interests and European interests do not need to be in conflict. They can be mutually benefiting. And it's why when we had a look on this strategy, and especially on the view the US relations with Europe is analyzed, it creates a kind of, let's say, trouble sentiment within Europe. It's disconcerting to us. It is disconcerting to us because, of course, to be honest, some elements, some analysis of this strategic paper rightly confront us with our own responsibilities and should not come as a shock to Europe, but rather as an electroshock for Europe, a kind of wake-up call, a call to action. And I'm thinking, for instance, about the defense industry. The US rightly expect the EU to carry a bigger share of the burden for its own security, and that's fair. But on the other hand, reading this national security strategy, there are some aspects, and certainly the way Europe is depicted, it is quite difficult to understand. Just like you do, we try to protect our citizens, our countries, our economy, our borders, our sovereignty, our territorial integrity for all European countries. Maybe we'll discuss about that a little bit later. And as close as we may be, we are also different. And I think that we should allow for this difference and sometimes agree to disagree. But I do not think it is the US interest to weaken Europe, because altogether we are still forming, let's say, an unequaled competitive market with many consumers with money and also many innovative industries. So I think that having a strong and assertive, a united Europe remain the best asset for US. And certainly because it would provide a possibility for both EU and US to maximize the joint influence globally, especially facing China. And it's why it was a little bit painful to read that maybe, let's say, considering that Europe is ill, that we see some some, let's say, declaration talking about undermining some democratic processes, also sanctioning some of our citizens, threatening some companies if they continue to promote gender equality, for instance, threatening our territorial integrity. That is not acceptable, that's unfair. But I'm sure that altogether, considering all the challenges we have globally, and the fact that we also share a long-standing history, we know what we owe to the US. And Belgium, as capital of Europe, but more globally the EU, we have always considering the US as a strong ally. And it will remain. It will remain, even if we have different sensitivities. It's so important to build bridges, to reinforce our partnerships. For commercial issues, of course, the trade aspect is very important, and it's why we need to avoid paradoxical approaches, considering that, for instance, we have to increase our spending for the defense sector according to the famous 5% NATO rate, but on the same time having a new tariff war that will, of course, impact the growth, the economic growth of our country. But I'm sure that we can find a solution together. I also had a meeting with the Secretary of Trade. You know that last summer an agreement has been concluded between the US and the EU with a 15% rate. I hope, and it was one of my messages, that this rate will be the same for all EU goods. That's also something which is important. I finish my sentence. Giving, on both sides of the Atlantic, predictability and security. Both of them are crucial for the trust of investors.
Minister, thank you for setting out that broad outlook. You've had an extremely strong program here. You've seen Secretaries Rubio and Commerce Secretary Lutnick. We'll come back to all of the issues that you mentioned. You've seen USTR Greer, Jameson Greer, Deputy Secretary Landau at the Department of State, Bridge Colby at the Department of War. That's a very strong program. When you talk about the need for these commonalities and the need not to get lost in what you called sort of marginal issues, but rather focus on the strategic ones. With that message and European commitment to security and defense, to Ukraine, to the Turnberry deal, what sort of response have you gotten in your meetings? Are you traveling home more hopeful that, that we can avoid between the United States and Europe to get lost in those marginal issues?
I will travel home with more confidence, with more trust. I discussed all those issues, bilateral issues between Belgium and the US, but also multilateral issues, like, for instance, Venezuela, Ukraine, DRC, also the Middle East, for instance, because Belgium is also part of many of the discussions as European country on all those topics. And talking about bilateral issues, I emphasized each time that even if we are, as Belgium, a small-size country compared to the US, we are, as Belgium, the 9th foreign investor in the US. Only last year, the Belgian companies have decided for more than 11 billion investment in the US, providing support to more than 230,000 jobs in this country. And last October, Her Royal Highness Princess Astrid, because you know that we are a kingdom, and good relationship between our king and the President Trump. Princess Astrid led a mission with 500 participants coming from more than 200 companies in the US, at the east of the country. And we signed a lot of contracts, of agreements, of investments for both sides. Google, Amazon, for instance, also announced at that time around 7 billion investment in Belgium for data centers and so on. You know that, talking about this bilateral issue, we also have a strong expertise in biopharmaceutical sector. We are really the R&D center of Europe, and a quarter of the medicines produced in Belgium benefits for the US citizens. So we have close relationships also on aerospace. That's something which is also strategic. Semiconductor, with IMEC, for instance. In port management, of course, with the port of Antwerp, the second largest in Europe. But we have also common challenges. And I put light on those aspects during my meetings, and especially one of those challenges is the fight against drugs trafficking. It's why it's certainly a good thing that a gangster like Maduro is no more at the office in Venezuela. The manner it has been done is something else. But we will work closely between Belgium and the US in order to fight against any type of drugs trafficking. Why? Because the biggest part of the cocaine coming from Latin America to Europe enters via the port of Antwerp in Belgium. So it has a direct impact for children, teenagers, adults, citizens, a dramatic one. So that's something which is also at the top priority of the agenda of the new Belgian government. And I will say, maybe you know it, but Belgium, thanks to Magritte and other ones, is well known as the country of surrealism. And there is a specific political tradition in Belgium. Each time we have a new government, the journalists identify a new name for qualifying this government. The previous one was called the Vivaldi government. Why Vivaldi? Because it was composed by the 4 classical political families, so like the 4 seasons of Vivaldi. But the current one, you know his name?
Arizona.
Arizona, yeah, exactly. I'm part of the Arizona government. Why Arizona? Because the 5 political parties included in the coalition have the different colors that we have in the flag of Arizona. So we are very close between the US and Belgium. But more seriously, talking now about multilateral issues, you have to understand that for small or middle-sized countries around the world, and certainly also in Europe, the defense of international law has been our biggest security guarantee. When you are not a big economic power, and certainly not a big military power, your biggest umbrella in order to avoid any bad temptation coming from abroad and a biggest country is the respect of international law. And it is why it is so important for us and in many European countries, taking into account the history of the continent, created from the ashes of 2 world wars. It's really that the rules-based order had to prevail.
So let me follow up exactly on that point. And you already mentioned the U.S. Operation Venezuela. You said yourself previously in here, Maduro must be held accountable. It's good that he's gone, but international law must be respected. And immediately we've already seen attention turn to other issues like Greenland and U.S. designs or interests in Greenland. So I want to get your take. You spoke of international law and the multilateral rules-based order as being important to Belgium. It's in the DNA of the European Union as well in many ways. But the global trend is elsewhere. I mean, we're moving towards great power politics, spheres of influence, and action beyond that rules-based order. So what does that mean for you, for Belgium, in terms of Greenland's most immediate issue, what we've seen in Venezuela and the U.S. operation there, and how do you think Europe needs to adapt to this world in which great power competition and power politics matter most, or more at least, without sort of betraying its DNA in many ways? So how does Europe have to change, and how is Belgium adapting to that new world?
It will be, frankly speaking, a big challenge. Because we will continue to advocate for respect of international law. You mentioned it is part of our DNA. But at the same time, we cannot continue to be naive. It doesn't mean that we do not have to respect international law in the future, of course. Otherwise, it will be really a pity and really painful for many countries, not only in Europe, but worldwide. And I continue to consider that defending the international law is also the best global solution we have in order to have a flourished businesses, in order to also respect each other and avoid conflicts. That's the best solution for having peace, having rules. And of course, the use of the force is not especially against the international law. It depends how to govern it with some rules, a clear framework. Talking about Greenland, you invite me to share my point of view on this issue. I've been crystal clear with my counterpart. It is, of course, totally unacceptable listening to hostile words, considering that potentially a part of the whole of the territorial integrity, of Greenland should be taken, should be violated. That's not acceptable. And I would like to be clear on that issue. I've heard that the US have some concerns related to the national security in the north of the hemisphere. They call their hemisphere. And I fully understand that from a certain point of view, you can have threats, you can have fears. So I don't want to deny those concerns. I consider with my European partners that it would be possible to mitigate the risk and to address those concerns and fears via a clear and frank dialogue. Denmark is not only a European country, it's also an ally within the NATO, like the US. So it doesn't make sense, considering that we will open a hostile chapter between two allies within the NATO. And I'm sure, because the Danish government has also opened the discussion for that, if the US have concerns, let's discuss about them. We already have, thanks to the NATO or other previous agreement, the capabilities to provide security to the US, but certainly not via any kind of violation of the territorial integrity of a European country.
Thank you. That's clear, Minister. Another test, and you already brought up Ukraine, has been Europe's ability to step up against Russia's continued war and full-scale invasion. We mark next month the 4-year, very tragic anniversary of that full-scale invasion, and that's been a major test for Europe. How would you rate over the last 12 months as Europe has tried to find its role in the US administration's push for ending Russia's war in Ukraine? How would you rate Europe's role, its support for Ukraine in that? And what would you like to see from Europe over the next 12 months? We've had some positive outcomes from the Paris summit, where your Prime Minister, I think, is present, was present. And what would you like to see Europe do in support of Ukraine moving forward?
The situation in Ukraine is very concerning, of course. And all the European countries have the conviction that the security of Ukraine is also a question of security for the whole continent. It's why, since the first day of this full-scale invasion, and I remind there is an aggressor and there is a victim. Sometimes it's useful to remind it. We stand by Ukraine. Belgium, but also the EU, and thanks also to the support of the US, we have been collectively able to provide the needed support to Ukraine. I'm talking about financial support, logistic support, military support, but it is not enough. And of course, we commend all the efforts made by President Trump in order to achieve a ceasefire and maybe a lasting peace. Really, honestly, that's a good thing. We would like that we consider that Europe should be more involved in the process, being around the table, not next to the table, because we don't think that we will be able to achieve a long-standing, sustainable result on Ukraine without Ukraine, but on Europe without Europe. And we really would like to be a player and not only a payer. And it's why it is so important to collectively achieve a result. And Belgium is part of the coalition of the willing. So it means that we will also be part of the coalition of the billing. And it's really important being able to count on the security guarantees that should be provided by the US. That's really a strategic point. But as member of the coalition of the willing, Belgium will play its role on air, on plane, on land, in order to achieve a result. It is really strategic in order to avoid that we buy only time, but if we have a new aggression war in 3, 4, 5 years, maybe against another European country, it doesn't make sense. So it's so strategic. And concerning how I assess the European attitude, let's be honest. I'm a pro-European since my birth, like most of the Belgians. But it is true that now one of our difficulties is our capabilities or ability to take decision and to take quick decision, due to the fact that most of the time for foreign policy issues, the internal rules of the EU required unanimity. And it is less easy to obtain such unanimity when we discuss about taking measure against Russia, notably due to the proxies of Hungary. But we have taken month after month, year after year, many sanction packages against Russia, and also with the support of Hungary. So it's not impossible, it has to be managed, but that's something which is crucial to emphasize, that we are capable to take decision, but not often quickly.
Let me follow up on a very much related issue. At the very end of last year, Belgium was, the last few weeks, very much in the spotlight in the debate around how to finance a loan from the European Union to Ukraine to bridge a financial shortfall and allow and send a signal to Russia as well that Europe will stand with Ukraine. And we ended up not with the seizure of those assets, which Belgium strongly opposed for fear of being exposed to Russian retribution. And we ended up with a mutually raised debt of 90 billion for 2 years. There's quite some light between the 90 billion and what was originally on the table, and perhaps also the needs of Ukraine, even over those 2 years. Why would you say this was still the way forward, and this is a good way forward? The deal that was struck at the European Council summit in late December.
It is true that my country has been under pressure last month, especially last month, but I should say last year. But and we have been victim of a smear campaign of people on social media explaining that we were the new Russian assets, that we were pro-Moscow. It's completely a fake, of course. As mentioned, we provide all the needed support to Ukraine since the first day, 1 billion each year, also military support. We will send to Ukraine our F-16 jet fighter. We've decided to buy F-35. But it is true that after quasi 4 years of war, the solidarity shown by all the European countries weighed a lot on the national budget, respectively. Because in many European countries at the same time, you had, on the one hand, to increase your spendings for the defense sector, for the NATO obligation, but also in order to support Ukraine. And on the other hand, for budgetary reasons, many countries had to cut some expense in education, healthcare, and so on. So it was more difficult to explain to our respective public opinion why it is so crucial to continue to pay attention to the Ukrainian conflict and to give money in billions to them. So I can understand, of course, that other colleagues considering that it was certainly easier to take the money of the bad Russians at the origin of the conflict. And it is true that the biggest part of those sovereign assets, because most of the time we are talking about frozen assets, but the frozen assets are the assets of the oligarch, but the immobilized assets, that's the sovereign assets of the central bank of Russia. So the money of the people. The biggest part is in Brussels, in an institution named Euroclear. 210 billion, approximately. But the need for the 2 coming years expressed by Ukraine is around 120, 30 billion. So the intention originally of the European Commission, push in the back by other European countries, was to use via a reparations loan those assets immobilized in Brussels in order to provide a financial support to Ukraine.
Why is the loan solution better than the seizure solution?
It's quite easy for our point of view to understand that. Why it is simple? Because the sovereign assets of each country in the world are protected robustly by international law. So it's quite difficult to explain that we are defenders of international law and at the same time not to respect international law for keeping those immobilized assets. It means that due to this international law and all the treaties, it would be possible for Russia to pursue Belgium. And so to obtain by a court the obligation for Belgium to reimburse the amount with penalties and so on, so maybe 2 times the initial amount. It is completely impossible for a country like Belgium. It represents more than 1/3 of our annual GDP. So it was not possible. It's why we explain to the Commission and the other countries that the solution of the reparations loan was too risky from a legal point of view, based on a political decision, not a judicial one. It was too risky also from a financial point of view, with potential systemic impact for the different financial places in Europe, with direct impacts on the trust on euro, and potentially other countries in the world taking back their own sovereign assets in Europe. So it was more comfortable and easy to borrow a new classical loan, as the EU has already done that many times during with the coronavirus crisis and so on. And finally, thanks to the action of our diplomacy and the Prime Minister of Belgium, we have reached a solution. We have achieved a positive outcome with 2/3 of the amount needed by Ukraine. And it was clear since the beginning that it was only 2/3 of the effort coming from the EU. And I think that's a positive aspect because we stay united and we have a solution for Ukraine.
Lots of questions here already on my iPad. I want to get to the audience with a strong urging for a really short, concise question and quick answers so we can get 2 or 3 more in. The gentleman over here on my far left in the front row. Give us your name, affiliation, and then a quick question, please.
Jay Kansara, Sensei is my company, but a question about, do you have any insights you can offer regarding Belgium's attitude and processes regarding migration, immigration, and perhaps lessons learned and maybe best practices?
Frankly speaking, my conviction is that the migration issue also needs to be better managed in Europe. And it is also one of the key priorities of the new Belgian government. How we can better assess that than today. First, thanks to a European point of view. And it is why we are discussing with all the 27 countries in order to change the migration policies. Because most of those aspects are directly managed at European level, not only at national level. We also have the possibility to take initiative at national level. And we are, for instance, currently thinking about the opening of a prison outside the country in order to put in this place some illegal criminals, but also in order to organize not in a prison but at a specific hub for migrants, illegal migrants, to manage the process in order to put them in those centers outside the country if they are not allowed to stay legally in the country. We also have decided to reduce the benefits of social advantages for illegal migrants if they are not allowed to be present. So we are trying to identify the best way to manage the issue, but also keep in mind that we also need to find a human solution. That's not only a theoretical issue. We are also talking about human beings. So we absolutely need to find the good balance, a well-balanced approach between those 2 aspects.
Thank you, Minister. One very last question here from Fran Burwell, and hopefully on the trade front. We can bring in the Minister on that as well, and then we'll have to wrap up.
Well, I was actually going to ask about Ukrainian membership in the EU eventually, but I will ask about trade because the EU is on a campaign to expand its trading partnerships, diversify its trading partnerships. You have a vote on Friday, I think now, on Mercosur. How do you think that's going to go? Will President von der Leyen be able to fly to Paraguay possibly next week to sign the trade agreement?
So the EU-Mercosur deal.
Yeah, my personal opinion on this deal is that by the end of the week, or if not at that time, a little bit later, it would be possible to conclude the deal with Mercosur. Because I think that the majority of the European states is pushing for having this solution. Frankly speaking, Belgium will abstain on the treaty. Why? Because we are also a federal government, and on such an issue, we absolutely need to have we do not have 50, but all the different states, let's say, within the country, aligned with the position. And it is not the case, because some parts of the country, the regions, in the north, in the south, consider that it still exists some problems for the farmers, for agriculture. And so we do not have the same convictions, so we will abstain. But I know that this is strategic now, more than ever, to diversify our partnerships and to conclude new trade agreements with different partners around the world. We will continue to work together with US, of course. That's so strategic. But it is true that, maybe I will say, thanks to the tariff war launched last year, it had opened the eyes of the European Union on the necessity, maybe the emergency, to conclude new strategic trade agreements, not only with Mercosur, but also with India, with Vietnam, with other parts of the world. And I think this is now a necessity.
Minister, thank you so much for this very wide-ranging conversation.
Thank you.
We could have probably needed a lot more time to cover all of the issues, but I really appreciate you being here, you sharing a little bit about your impressions from your very high-level meetings here, from your very strong program, and also how you, Belgium, and Europe look at 2026 and priorities for the transatlantic partnership. Your note of optimism, really, of finding areas for cooperation, even if there are headwinds and even if there are other issues that drag us in a different direction. That's certainly the spirit of the Europe Center and the Atlantic Council. And so I hope our participants here in the room virtually will continue to follow both your policies and your efforts, but also our coverage and our programming and analysis of the transatlantic partnership. And we hope to have you back on one of your next visits.
Thank you.
With that, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone, for joining us.
Thank you for this interesting meeting. Thanks to your long question and my short answers.
Very good. Thank you, Minister.